Well, it's so much an honor to have you ask me to do this. Um, it's been the hardest speech I have ever tried to write, and I was still at breakfast trying to say, what am I going to say today? Because I know that half of you know everything I'm going to say, and half of you have no idea at all about the history. So I'm going to try to do a little combination thing here of going over some history and then talking about some issues that I'm really very worried about. A little closer here? Okay. Now, Hurl, I need you to put a little more light on me here because I'm going to read something, and my eyes are going big time. So, Bruce and I were in the Philippines, and we've been there 3 times. And in 1989, as we were returning, and I was coming back to check to see what was going on over at AOPIC, on the plane on the way back, I had picked up this book called Getting to the 21st Century. And it was written by David Korten. And David Korten was a man who was at the Harvard Business School and then went on to become an official at the World Bank and at the Asian Development Bank. So this was a big-time, really highly respected economist worldwide. And I thought, well, I should read this book by David Korten because this will help me. I had left my job at UCM, and I thought, well, I'll see what I'm going to do in the future. I had no idea what this book would do, but I'll tell you, I just want to read a paragraph or so because this was so impactful, and it's not unlike exactly what we face today. Korten says, an important impetus for decisive action comes from the growing realization in both North and South that our planet is gripped in an environmental crisis, a problem that cannot be ignored. Fine-tuning of a failed system is no longer adequate. The realization is beginning to dawn that we have placed so much pressure on the natural systems, the natural environment, that continuing with business as usual is likely to have intolerable consequences for the rich and the poor alike. There are indications that the crisis is creating a readiness to question basic assumptions that did not exist even as recently as 1987, and he wrote this in 1988. At issue is the most fundamental of assumptions, that is, that continued pursuit of economic growth as the focal point for development is a priority that can no longer be an option. If, as suggested by a substantial body of evidence, the wealth-consuming countries of the North are stressing the global ecology to its limits, there are 3 ways to address the issue. 1, press for continued conventional economic growth in both North and South, and face an almost certain failure of global ecosystems. 2, leave the poor of both the North and the South to live in perpetual poverty. 3, pursue drastic measures to reduce the demands that the overconsumers of both North and South place on the environment, to give the poor scope to achieve a decent human existence. These are not happy choices. They are, however, the only choices. This is true in 1989. This is true today. And what the wonderful work that is happening here, the wonderful work that is happening to build a local economy is exactly what Korten in his next 5 books lays out as what has to happen. And I have followed this man since reading this book. He's written 5 additional bestsellers that are really knockouts. And I reread 2 of them recently. And my friend Marianne Flournoy and I are reading some of these things together, and we talk about these things a lot. And we realized that we are so blessed in this community because all of the groups, CFI and all, Upgrade Athens, all of us, we're all working together, and this is exactly what Corton says has to happen, but this has to happen worldwide, everywhere. Now, I just want to mention a few other books that I think are really relevant for you to pay attention to, and probably much more important that I say these than I give you anything else in the speech. If you don't know Yes Magazine, please come up and take a look afterwards. I've got lots of them up here. Yes Magazine is published by David Corton's wife, and David Corton contributes every month. This is the most important journal that anybody in this room can be reading because it lays out how we can do and make the best choices among all those three choices. It is the practical information, and it verifies that it's not hopelessness out there. There's a lot of hope because there are thousands and thousands of groups that are doing excellent work like we are. We just don't all know about each other. And this magazine is linking us. It's networking us together. So I really had wanted to find enough money to just be able to buy everybody a subscription because this is so important. We all read and study this. Then somebody mentioned David Orr. I think you did, right. So David Orr, I talked to him recently. He was speaking in Ohio, and he's written a book called Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse. I mean, this is a esteemed scholar at Oberlin College, the director of environmental studies there, internationally known. And he said, we are down to the wire. No matter what, all the good work that's going on, we cannot for a moment to not be vigilant. We have to transform every single system out there. So this is a very important book to read. If you are not familiar with James Hansen, you can go onto his website. James Hansen is the foremost person on climate change in this country, probably in the world. This book really grabbed my heart. This is called Storms of Our Grandchildren, and I feared for my granddaughter when I read this book. This book moved me into, try to move me into action. So anything you can read on climate change, but this one is written by, he was the head of NOAA, National Oceanographic Administration. There are so many more, but then this is another book that's very important. This is called Blessed Unrest. And Paul Hawken is a capitalist. He is an owner of a well-known gardening supply business that's national. But he decided to take time to document the groups like ours that are out there. And he says there are over 2 million groups worldwide that are working on sustainability issues. And that's a very, very hopeful thing. So we are part of the Blessed Unrest here. And if you haven't seen this book, get a hold of it if you can. All right, now I'm going to go into some of the history. Okay, well, Lois mentioned AOPIC. I knew I'd have to move around. I can't stand still. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history here that you probably had no idea about. There were a number of us who were part of the Indochina Peace Campaign during the war. So there were a number of us who were part of the Indochina Peace Campaign, and we were based in Athens here. And so this will it'll come up in the next slide here. Okay, so in 1982, there were massive budget cuts that were implemented by the Reagan administration, and in particular, the poor, were really, really affected by this. And so there were leaders in this community that were from 5 different agencies that got together and said, we need to do something about this, and so let's have a rally. And so we brought about 5,000 people to the West Portico of Memorial Auditorium, and Senator Metzenbaum at the time came. This was the basis of beginning to form small clusters of community people who were talking about the issues. And so this included the Welfare Department and Community Action Agency and COAD and Rural Action, not Rural Action, but United Campus Ministry where I was working. So there were, and then the SOWASH Law Office got involved also. Anyway, there were lots of people that got involved. And so these groups began to discuss seriously that they wanted to do something about these budget cuts and the whole issue of poverty. And we realized that to stabilize this, we needed to link up with another group. And there was, after the war ended, there was people who had been a part of the Indochina Peace Campaign broke off and went into 18 different states. And there was a chapter in Cleveland of the Indochina Peace Campaign that formed into what was called the Ohio Public Interest Campaign. And so we met with those folks, and we realized they were going to be a fairly stable organization. They already had their feet on the ground. And so we linked up formally with them and got enough money together, and we hired our first co-directors, an attorney, Richard Renner, and his wife, Laura. And so based on citizen involvement that we had generated, there was a number of issues we took on, and they were all issue-based things that came out of what people said they wanted to do. We didn't cook up anything. They came to us with these issues. And us was just a board and just a couple of staff people. And so the issues that were taken up between 1982 and 90 were the ones you see up there: strip mining and longwall mining and medical waste incineration. You can read them for yourself there. A lot of them are the same ones that we're dealing with still in terms of like toxic dumping and out-of-state trash, etc. So these were solid groups. They were very, very active, very passionate groups, and they were spending, in some cases they were taking their issues to court, and it meant having a lot of bake sales that they would have to, pay for their attorney's fees, etc. And so there was some burnout. And at one point, I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Anyway, so all these groups that were working on those issues, we encouraged them to use this methodology. It's called the circle of praxis. And so they were really to listen to one another very carefully, first of all, after they'd identified their issue. And then we used techniques called popular education or participatory research. These are very well-known techniques. A lot of them, some of us learned at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, but they're well-acknowledged methodologies that work with small groups. And particularly, they work well with people who aren't highly educated. So it suited us well. And then we would ask groups to do a situation analysis to really get a handle on what was their situation like right where they were, and then if they could, to do a power analysis. And these are the kinds of things we could help them with those methodologies. Also, environmental and socioeconomic analysis were important to do, depending upon what their issue was, of course. And then you move more into formal planning and begin to find partners and seek funding. And so this is a circle that goes on and on when you're working on issues like they were. So there's a marriage between community organizing and community development, and all of those issues that I just had up on the screen there. This was all basic community organizing, and because most of it grew right out of what people said they wanted to do. And it can be short-term or it can be really long-term if you get into the courts and are trying to win along issues. But the issues come from the people, and it's pretty action-oriented. Like if some people know the group down in Torch right now, you realize that they're really active. They want action. So you practice consciousness raising, you do education, sometimes there's confrontation, negotiation, and staff are there to support or to train or to organize and to assist the local people. Now, sometimes an issue gets to the point where it begins to change and evolve, and so it moves more into a community development mode. And sometimes it goes back and forth, back and forth. But when you're moving into community development, like Rural Action did, and when AOPIC became Rural Action, we left the world of organizing by and large, and we moved into community development. And this was the choice of those people. It was the same people in those issue groups that formed, they were AOPIC, but they formed Rural Action, and they decided to make that change. So, so you derive your issues there from more planned goals and objectives, and it's much more of a process-oriented. That praxis methodology is really practiced there. Once we started to get a membership going, these were the clusters that formed. And there might have even been a few more, but these were the ones that sort of stabilized. So there were committees that were some were based upon people's interests, and some were based upon where they lived or where they resided. So there was an agriculture committee, and an arts and culture committee, and an energy committee, and an environmental education committee, forestry, housing, land trusts, human needs, recycling, schools, watersheds. We didn't turn anybody away. All we said was, if you're going to start up something, you get 4 other people, at least 4 other people, and then we'll give you some time. So we weren't about to take just 2 people and say, okay, that's enough. Everybody had to follow that praxis model. There had to be some decent methodology going on. And people were encouraged to pay basic dues. I learned that from Cesar Chavez. He said, I don't care how poor people are, they can always pay $5 a year or something like that. So we encouraged dues payment. And they had to be involved with a larger group. One of the best things about these groups were that they weren't just people who sat around and BS'd. Seriously, we studied. And some of these are the scholars we studied, they're the ones up on the table here. So we looked at Hazel Henderson, there's David Corton, and Herman Daly, Michelle mentioned earlier in her session. Thomas Berry. Thomas Berry was probably my favorite one. He wrote a book called The Great Work, and the first book he wrote that really moved me was called The Dream of the Earth. I remember John Sowash gave this to me, and he said, you haven't read this yet? You got to read this. So I read The Dream of the Earth, and it changed my life. John Cobb, Paul Hawken. So these were the leaders, the basic, powerful scholars who were talking about sustainability. And we wanted to really pay attention to them. In addition to studying the scholars, we found out who else in the country was doing good work, and we went to see them. We went to KFTC, Carol. We went down there and visited. We would bring people here, we would go there, we would read, we would study. We tried to make sure that if we were going to propose something within those committees to become something lasting, that it was based in the best scholarship and the best knowledge. Okay, let's go. Okay. Okay, so this quote has been so important to so many scholars. Thomas Berry said, it's all a question of story. We are in trouble now because we do not have a good story. Well, what is a good story? What is a bad story? And I have been struggling with this ever since I read it. And I realized as I read over, again, David Corton's 5 books, this is what kicked him into gear also. He read Thomas Berry, smart as he was with his PhD and all that business. He still was trying to figure it out. What is the new story? What is the story that makes sense for us to live by? So, well, the old prosperity story is the old story we have all been taught. Economic growth that fills our lives with abundance and happiness, that lifts the poor from misery, creates wealth needed to protect the planet and the environment, and money is the measure of wealth. Money, money, money. The framework causes people to believe that economic decisions affecting their lives are made by faraway experts and mysterious market forces. Most define the economy as a market system, a system of competition and accumulation. I watch Nightly Business Report faithfully every night at 11:30. And I watch it partly because I still want to know whether this story is still holding sway so diligently. And it is. I mean, this is the old prosperity story. This is good. There's some truth there. It wouldn't be going on if it wasn't. But it's not the only story. Let's go. Okay. All right. Here's the story. This is the true story, folks. And we made up this circle ourselves. I remember we were sitting around saying, "Oh, what is the real story?" And we started putting these circles together. These interlocking circles, this is the true story. It's not just the economy. We focus all of our time on the economy. We think this, you talk to the Chamber of Commerce, and you want to know what the health of the region is, well, they go right to the economy, and that's it. They stop. The economy is embedded in a larger social system, which is embedded in a larger culture. Those things together come together and make up a bioregion. I had a number of slides in this presentation I took out. They were on the bioregion. They were great slides, but I took them out because I knew we wouldn't have time to go over all of it. But this concept of a bioregion is such a rich notion. Our real address is our bioregion. So, and we are down somewhere in there in the economy, and so it's all held together into this within the biosphere. So the true story is the wealth of all of this together. It is not just measured by money. Okay. So here's the sustainability triad. If we are going to be measuring, Frank, businesses and the triple bottom line and social enterprises, we have to look at everything. How is this business, or how is this organization, how is this endeavor, how is this activity impacting society, the economy, and the environment? And it can't be something we just do once in a while. This is the transformative measure. It has to happen with everything we do. We have to ask this, and we have to use this as a measure. And there was another slide I took out of here because I didn't think we'd have time, but there are now lots and lots of other indicators. It's not just the GMP. I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing to say. We quote the GMP all the time. There are, Hazel Henderson has her own index she's developed. The country of Bhutan has developed an index on happiness, the World Happiness Index. There are all kinds of different indices for measuring sustainability. But these are the things that we have to look at for everything. Everything we do, we've got to look at these three things. Okay, so people-centered development. Real wealth is created by investing in human capital of productive people, social capital of caring relationships, and natural capital of healthy ecosystems. That's the new story. That's the real story. So, all right, so I think you all have read this beautiful vision statement. I'm just going to shut up for a moment. You can read it. It's so beautiful. It just makes me cry. Okay. All right, there's the mission. All right, so the methodology we have adopted as sort of the basic methodology that we're using is the asset-based community development. It was developed by several different scholars at different times, but the Neil Flora, there's two Floras there in Iowa. They were sociologists. They developed this asset-based methodology. And then there were some scholars at Northwestern University who operationalized it for communities. A participatory development approach that is focused on building communities by identifying and utilizing community assets. And you heard Amy Grove talk about this, about looking at the assets. So when Candy's partnership and leadership development class goes out, or when any of the work happens in the field, they're always looking for people to be measuring their assets. So the asset-based approach focuses on opportunities and assets. Participants are creators, producers, or owners. It empowers people. They gain skills by doing it. A change agent uses relationships, and people are the answer. They may develop the program. If you go out into a community and you start asking them to do a needs assessment, which is the old methodology, Rick, you know this from development work. Let's do a needs assessment. You can do a needs assessment, and especially in Appalachia, you're going to get a lot of needs. There's a lot of stuff out there that needs to be fixed. And all you get is a depressed community. They say, oh my God, I didn't know that we were that needy. Who could possibly fix us? If you start out and say, measure your assets, what do you have? What kind of people do you have? What kind of buildings do you have? Do you have any rivers? What kind of natural assets do you have? People come away from that saying, wow, look what we've got to build with. We're not starting from scratch at all. But this approach has worked so beautifully, and we're doing it in a rural area. It was really designed to start with to be used in an urban area, but it's been just great. All right, so there's a process here. You go into a community, you form a development action team from within the local organization or the local community. You identify the individual assets. So, if you start out with yourself, I'd ask Susan, what assets do you bring, Susan, to this effort? And then you identify the assets of the organization. What are its strengths? And then you identify the assets of the associations that are in that area, of the other institutions like any universities, any churches, any businesses. So you do a thorough asset mapping of a community, of a region. And I remember we did this in Trimble. When we first got out there, and people were saying, we don't have anything here. And by the time we finished putting the assets of Trimble up on the board was covered. And then we started to say, do we have any networks here? And we started networking the people in the organizations. It was just amazing. This huge whiteboard was just covered with all kinds of crisscrosses. There were a lot of dense networks there and a lot of assets to work with. And if you'd gone in to say, let's do a needs assessment, all you would have gotten was, lowest educational attainment, highest poverty level, poorest economic, you would have just gotten all that stuff. So our rural renewal strategy took a long time to write, but then it came down to 3 major areas of health: healthy economies, healthy environment, and healthy communities. And we focused many, many different kinds of projects within each one of those clusters. And so now, under Michelle's wise guidance, there's been a whole new dimension that's been brought to the fore here in the 2013 to 2017 strategy, and now you're going to be moving into even a new strategy beyond this. But this one really focused in more on the economy. The other ones were dealing more with the community and the environment. This one's focusing more in on the economy. Build a new Appalachian Ohio economy. Okay. Wealth is not just money. Wealth is a reservoir of all assets or forms of capital that can contribute to the well-being of the people, places, or economies. Okay, just as a little summary again, that there's not just one form of capital. There's natural, social, economic, built, human, moral, intellectual. The importance of new leadership. Okay, we will need leadership at the highest levels and citizen mobilization to bring about the necessary policies and action. I stole that from David Orr. David Orr in his book said, major policy changes have to happen. Government has really been not doing their job, and we have got to spend a lot of time building new leadership for our state houses and for the Congress. And we have to also not forget that citizen mobilization at the very grassroots is just as important, and they have to both be done together. They have to happen simultaneously. Rural action is featured in a new book. It's just hot off the press, and the author, Allison Matthew, says, rural action is both in the vanguard of a new economy and in the trenches of dealing with immediate issues faced by local communities. It is a unique and valuable combination, and its history of moving beyond resistance that gives it a powerful and legitimate voice. So I hope, that was nice for Allison to say that. She spent a lot of time interviewing Michelle, a number of us who've been here before, and so anyway, I guess Michelle will be talking, you'll reveal that book to the public more later. It's be some rollout of it. Will there? Okay. Next. Okay. Now, this is the book on hope. This book is called Active Hope. It's by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone. Chris Johnstone's a medical doctor, and Joanna Macy's a psychiatrist. Joanna Macy writes lots of rituals that help people go through hard transformations, personal transformations. They think that what we all face with climate change is going to be so hard, and also with species extinction, with economic decline, the same conditions that existed before the Great Depression still exist. That there's buried rage. Joanna Macy says that within most teenagers and college-age kids, there is buried rage about the world we're leaving them. And she sees it all the time in her practice. Once she gets just below the surface, she said that they're really angry with their parents, and they're really angry with the lifestyle that they've been brought up with, and that they know is wrong, and that they know they're consuming too much. And she said, we had better be prepared for this. And she is working very hard to work with small groups, and she spends a lot of time. She's a Buddhist, but she's working with all kinds of religious traditions worldwide to get them ready for the onslaught that's coming. Because if any of these scholars are even halfway accurate, we are really going to face something, and it's not going to be that long from now. And organizations like ours are just so important. And the 2 million others that have been identified by Paul Hawken, and there are probably more than those. These stable places where people can come together and where they can be honest with one another, and where they can struggle with the issues and figure out solutions and try and experiment to do certain things, and if it doesn't work out, try again, and come together. This is where people will receive their hope. But to bury our heads in the sand and say, well, maybe that'll be something that'll happen 50 or 70 years from now, but it's certainly not going to happen in my lifetime. I don't have to worry about that. That's not happening now. Because we also live in this amazing area with all these amazing people and all these amazing organizations, we are in a bit of a bubble. But, any of us who have lived in the developing world will tell you it's really, really hard. So we had better pay attention, and part of our daily discipline, I think, needs to be reading not only the stuff that makes us feel good, but the stuff that really gets us just to see what the rest of the world is facing and how much suffering there is really going on everywhere, and that we are all linked, and that their suffering, in a sense, should be our suffering, and that their hope should be our hope. But we have got to be together. And, it's like I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm so grateful for you, because this is a remnant that needs to be repeated many, many times all over. And it's so wonderful to know we have it, and that we're strong, and that we're helping other organizations become strong. When I look out into this community and I see how many former Vistas are now heading up other organizations or embedded somehow in other nonprofits, it is truly an astonishing thing. So, although there's a lot that's unraveling, there's a lot that's being knitted back together. So, stepping out boldly has been our history. This is a book written by Ted Bernard, who's in the geography department here at OU. David Corton says that what we're participating in is what's called a great turning. It's a time in history when we are really in the midst of all systems are turning. They're unraveling, but they're turning. For people to think of their place as destination rather than devastation will require leadership that taps into local knowledge and plans for the long haul. That's it. And Ted saw that in Rural Action, and he featured the Money Creek Project, and he's I don't know if Marianne Bork is still here or not, but you know, there's Marianne. Marianne is really the person, we were sitting in CASA one day, and she was reading the Federal Register, for God's sake. And she said, she came over to my table and she said, look at this thing in the Federal Register. She said, we could apply for this money, we could start up a watershed project. I said, go for it, Marianne, we'll do it. So, it's great. Creating hope for the long haul. So here's Mitch. Here's a quote from Mitch. Monday Creek was eaten up with acid mine drainage, and it was dead as a bag of hammers. There you go, Mitch. That's Mitch talk. And then here's Mary Sturtz, who was a colleague of both Mary Ann's and Mitch's. Step out boldly. The science is there, and you can have every possible skill set. But it's the people and their boldness that will make the difference. Mary died prematurely about a decade ago. I'll never forget when I had lunch with her one day. She wanted to know whether she should throw in with Rural Action. She didn't know whether we were the organization she could trust. So we talked a long time, and it turned out that it worked out well. But thank God for the Marianne Borks and the Mitch Farleys and the Mary Sturtzes. They have stepped out boldly, and that's our role. That's our role. We can't shy away from this. So the hope for change resides in the people who are engaged in rebuilding their local communities. So there are these were just questions that I threw up because at night when I wrote this speech, this is what I said. This is what I was thinking. What are we willing to let fall away? What in my life am I willing to let fall away? Bruce says, start with your closet. What must we retain? To whom or what do you belong? How would you tell the story of transformation? If we have to transform every system, where would you start? Where do you start? Will the great turning happen before the support systems are in place? The real great turning, the final great turning? Are we celebrating enough? No. David Corton says, celebrate and quit accumulating. Just don't buy so much stuff, just celebrate. Okay, so the final word goes to Thomas Berry. Michelle gets out of the way. The distorted dream of an industrial technological paradise. The distorted dream of an industrial technological paradise is being replaced by the more viable dream of a mutually enhancing human presence within an ever-renewing, organic-based Earth community. We're helping to create that last ever-renewing, organic-based Earth community. Thanks to all of you that's happening here.
Another round of applause for Carol. If you know Carol, as you do today, then you know she is charismatic, but not the scary kind of charismatic. The kind that listens, that draws people out, that draws out their highest aspirations and dreams. Let's see if I can get through this without crying. We'll see that. And that when needed helps them see the guideposts of life, morality, and purpose. Because you build up people, you have also built up organizations made of great people, looking for great meaning and purpose. You have inspired hundreds of activists, people who knew they wanted to change the world, so you sharpened their purpose and commitment. For people who didn't know they wanted to change the world, you moved them to action. And for everyone else, when you leave the room, they know you are a person of great integrity and distinction and class. You need to come a little closer. You were a network builder when people didn't know what networks were. Because you were a community organizer like Barack Obama and Jesus. And you always told us it's one person at a time, one heart at a time, and that there aren't any shortcuts. And we've seen you moved. Where is she? There she is. You have remained an open and deep listener everywhere you have gone. In the United States, listening to the maids in Botswana and the activists in the Philippines, some who didn't make it out. Your willingness to be open to the other and to see in humanity the great mysteries of creation has inspired us. Speaking truth to power is something people like to say they do, but I and many others have been in the room when you've done it. And most importantly, you've done it with love in your heart each time. It is the single most important thing I learned from you, and the hardest to emulate. To love thy enemy, to always believe people can change, and to never give up on a human being. Because changing the world is very hard, and we are on a frightening path, and fear will creep into us and make us less than our great selves, and probably before we remember who we should be as humans, part of creation. Another message you've given us. But our Athens County and Southeast Ohio community honestly have a better chance of getting through these difficult times because we learn from you, and you have left us a lasting legacy. Your decades of building United Campus Ministry, APAC, and guiding so many other community and nonprofit leaders, and 15 years of creating one of the most significant rural development organizations in the country means you are in our DNA. In the DNA of the kinds of work we will do, what we will value, and how we will take care of this place and each other. So Carol, we cherish you today for all you've given, for your family, the fact that your granddaughter and your grandson care deeply about the earth and the environment, and people. And we want you to know that the expression of justice you've taught us now for more than 5 decades carries on. Carol, today Rural Action honors you with its Sustainability Award for Lifetime Achievement. Thank you. There you go.
Oh, do I have to say anything else? Thank you so very much, Michelle. Well, you know she's like another kid of mine, so it's been marvelous to work with Michelle all these years, and the work never stops, so it just keeps going on. And thank you to all of you, and let's just keep doing it.